And so today we are here to specifically talk about how to build empathy in your team as you've been jolted into this new remote era, as well as continue to build a product and continue to ship to your customers. So some of the things I'm going to do to make this a little more interactive. So the webinar should be approximately about 30 minutes. We are going to reserve 15 minutes or more towards the end of the session for a Q&A where you're able to ask us questions, as well as ask us questions about our existing process, as well as any of the topics that have been covered in the webinar. However, during the webinar as well, I would love to propose questions to our audience and to our attendees. All you need to do is click on the chat button. And then you can start writing your response. You can basically select the response heads to the panelists, and we'll be receiving the response. So we'll be asking you questions about how you guys are currently navigating this process. And typically the answers will be yes or no, but it would be great to just get those responses just to understand the nature and structure of our audience today. The other thing also is feel free to send questions during the state of the webinar. Towards the end, we're going to then be looking at the questions and then starting responses. So feel free to send those questions in as we present. I think firstly, can everyone hear me okay? Is the audio fine? Lauren, Derek, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, perfect.
Yeah, audio sounds great. Thanks.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, we'll get started. And I'm seeing some chats coming in as well. Thank you so much. So firstly, I wanted to give a little bit of background on us as a team. So we are about 21 people. We're based in San Jose, so here, as well, San Jose, California, as well as Poland. So before COVID, we were a partially remote team. So roughly about half the team was remote, yet the majority of the team was based out of an office here. And I do personally have some experience running and managing remote teams. So at my first company, it was an entirely remote company. And we had roughly about 25 people globally. And so with this second company, this is been a very different experience, especially because this is venture backed and my first company was bootstrapped. Previously, also in terms of my experience, I've worked at McKinsey and GE, and primarily within engineering and data analysis departments. But in terms of why we built our company and our platform is that we essentially wanted to design something that was helping modern software teams manage and deliver across their product development lifecycle. So we came together as founders and as a leadership team, and we were very frustrated with the likes of Jira and other existing project management tools. We felt that they were focusing less on execution and more on really wading through the software-defined tickets that were relevant to you. And so we wanted to build something that was solely focused on execution and provided predictability and visibility in the software lifecycle. So this is a little bit about us as a company and as a team. Some of the problems that we've seen software teams face pre-COVID, and I'll talk a little bit about post-COVID, was that we found that during the product development process, there's a lot of different tools that are being utilized. And so switching between documents, spreadsheets, and then also issue tracking software like Jira was painful. It made aligning the team painful. And here's what's interesting. After speaking with some of our users post-COVID, these issues have only been further exacerbated when you're remote. So the thing is that when you're in a physical office environment, you can still align the team to a certain extent, even on different tools, because you're just able to communicate better. And then the other thing was we also heard that constantly having to do rework because specs and requirements are unclear, outdated, or hard to find. And then the other problem was the delivery. So how do you actually predict delivery with dependencies that are not visible early enough? So things around estimating effort, estimating timelines, estimating ETAs on a certain feature or a certain part of the product that needs to get delivered. And so now, as we kind of talk about how we're navigating this COVID era, so just as a reminder, feel free to submit your questions in the chat box as we go on. But one of the first questions I'd like to pose to you is, what are the biggest challenges facing you today as a product leader in your organization? And you can pose this as a very quick challenge, but we'd love to hear, and based on this, we're actually going to also cater some of the content that's upcoming, but are you facing issues with emotion, handling and managing emotion at a time where the news cycle is so aggressive and so continuous and constant? Or are you facing issues with ensuring that the team is productive in a remote environment? How is your team handling and managing childcare, parental care? And so we'd love to hear from the attendees here today. What are some of the biggest challenges you've been facing, not only as a product leader, but as a leader as well in your org? And how are you, and then the other question that I'd also like to pose to folks that are attending is, what is your team most worried about? So what are the things that you're consistently hearing from your team? Some of the things that we've been hearing, so I've actually been hosting a few counseling sessions with founders over the last few days, and things have been difficult, especially as people are also managing their own personal psyches, as well as running and managing their own, in some cases, COVID symptoms. So one of the things we're going to do today is talk about some of the issues and challenges we've heard from our team, how we've tried to run and manage these problems together as a team, and what we've done so far. So some of the things so one of the things I've just heard from one of the attendees is Jeffrey Robb mentions, biggest issue with my company is getting agreement on product direction and focus. Currently working on defining a good strategy. It's a great point, Jeffrey. And what's really interesting is that that is a problem that you'll see at on-prem office environments that again gets exacerbated in the remote era, because in some cases you just don't have as many check-ins when you're working remotely. Derek, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. What do you think are one of the best ways for a team to get agreement and alignment on product direction and focus, especially in such a constant, ever-changing environment?
Yeah, I think getting shared understanding and agreement of where the product should go and ultimately where the company should go is challenging enough, and made even more challenging when everyone is not being able to get together in a room to discuss. I think one of the areas that could help is really having good, strong documentation that is helping with fleshing out the details around discussion points, decision points, and constantly referring back to those, tying those to your daily activities, tying those to your tooling, for example, in terms of your projects, making sure that those documents are tightly linked to what's going on your day-to-day, what's going on in your quarterly plans, perhaps. That would be really necessary in order to make sure everybody is aligned. And then secondarily, making sure that there is a channel for everyone to properly discuss, setting up the proper meetings, and really during this time over communicating, making sure that everything is well documented and discussed is really key.
I can't agree more on the over communicating part. So one of the things that we're realizing as product and engineering leaders in the org is that under communicating just won't do anymore. And it does mean that even though you're excessively documenting every part of the decision-making process, what it does is that it ensures that there is a consistent ongoing knowledge base that the team can refer to. So C.T. Sibrandij is the CEO of GitLab. And one of the things that he consistently advises me and other teams to do is to maintain that level of documentation. So GitLab has been remote first from day one. And you should actually take a look at GitLab's remote guide. They recently published it, and it's open source and available for free. One of the things they do is they painstakingly document, and they go above and beyond in terms of transparency, but they painstakingly document every single all hands that takes place, and they open it up to the public. Of course, you can just open it up to your internal org. However, not only are they obsessively documenting each part of every decision and process, but you can see all the way from the quarterly OKRs down to daily meetings and decisions that take place with strong agendas in place for each meeting, as well as what decisions came from that meeting that may directly affect strategy. And so some of the things to keep into consideration, and John, thank you. John just actually shared the GitLab URL. I'm just going to share that with all the attendees as well. Thank you, John. All right, so let's keep moving on. So some of the things that we've seen work well from a tactical advice perspective is that firstly, you want to make sure that there's open office hours with leadership. So we operate at a level and on our team where I'm always accessible. My door is always open, and I will always be available to speak to any team member about any ongoing issues, whether daily or weekly or monthly, that they're facing. But one of the other things is to keep an open door. And one way to do this is to block off a time on your calendar, about an hour or an hour and a half, where anyone in the company or in your team can book time. So whether it's 20 minutes or 30 minutes, having that open door policy on Zoom, Microsoft Meetings, whatever sort of software you're using for video conferencing, and making sure that it's recurring as well, keeps that cadence going, and it ensures that your team has time and the ability to communicate with leaders at any given point of time. And this goes if you're a remote team of 20 or 200. I think at this stage, we really need to have those open doors policies and be widely available for our teams. Now, the other thing is empathy. So one of the things we, as the crisis hit and as things continued to happen, the first thing we instituted was we were like, okay, we're going to immediately be remote and work from home. Here is a quick COVID guide. So the first thing we did was we had about a 4 to 5 page guide that detailed just what's happening with the process, how to navigate this current environment, and what you can expect on a weekly and daily basis, and just kind of reassuring the team that not only are we here for them, but that there's enough runway to get through this together. So the other thing also, I actually wanted to give an example of this spreadsheet. So the other thing that happened was we continued to hear from team members that they couldn't get grocery supplies, and that they were having trouble finding groceries. So one of the first things we did was we literally went into Google, into our drives, and created a grocery guide. So it was just a simple Google sheet. I'm just going to pull it up now, and so that you can view it. But we called it our ongoing COVID-19 guide. And so here, one of the first things we did was we started listing places that had stock, what times they were stocked, and then just quick URLs and addresses to those locations. It might sound like a very small thing, but then your team feels that they're great. They feel grateful for the fact that you're thinking about them, and you know the kind of challenges that they might be facing to procure food or groceries. And so we started then also adding in medical tips as well. So the other thing is that in this time and day and age, having healthcare insurance doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get tested. And so we started also putting together, and one of the things we did was we open sourced this to the whole company so that anyone could go in and start adding their own tips. And within I think it was 2 hours, we had a full grocery guide, we had a full medical tips guide, just as to how you're kind of navigating this current environment. And just quickly, it's something really quick you can do, but just putting together these Google Sheets really enabled the team to know and understand that, hey, we're in this together, and we're going to start figuring out what are issues that you're having. The other thing that also ended up happening was we actually had some stories of barter. So for team members that were living close by, no joke, this happened actually between Vijay and Nick, Derek, but they exchanged toilet paper and pasta. And then they also there was another barter exchange that I heard of, which is like half of your pasta for half of your pasta sauce. This might sound like really small things, but we created, one of the things we're going to do is create a channel, just call it barter on Slack. And then your team members can actually start to barter goods. This might sound crazy, but these things work. And it's just unprecedented times that we live in. And so the more that we can help grease the wheels for any problems that the team is facing, then you can start thinking about productivity. The first thing is to be to have a significant dose of empathy and to start thinking about what are the day-to-day issues that your team is now currently facing that they may not have otherwise faced before. That's the first step. Then you can start thinking about, from a productivity angle, what needs to get done for the remote team. So if you guys have any instances or examples to share of just things that you were navigating, examples in terms of like a spreadsheet that was created by a team member or a new Slack channel, please feel free to share. We'd love to share with the rest of the webinar. So moving back into our presentation and just confirming everyone can see the presentation and my screen. Lauren and Derek, can you just get a thumbs up? Thank you. Okay. So now the other thing also is this is an ongoing situation. So if you don't already do weekly all hands, I highly suggest that you get into the cadence of conducting weekly all hands. And if your weekly all hands were just regular updates to the wider company, start changing the structure where you're also incorporating the new cycle and how it affects the company and the team. So by a show of hands, how many people are today from participants here today? How many people are conducting weekly all hands? And how have you seen your weekly all hands change? Please feel free to weigh in. So because this is an ongoing situation, one of the things that we're finding is that we're keeping all hands fairly short. We are also continuing to be as transparent as possible in this current era, and keeping everyone well informed of company strategy, leadership. And I've also personally taken the time to let the team and the company know that this is something that is top of mind for me. And I'm ensuring that we're continuing to move through this, through this period of, unsure, unclear waters, and that my job and my goal is to set sail and ensure that we're continuing to sail smoothly. And so because this is, and some of the things I've even been hearing from other CEOs is that they're even changing from being a peacetime CEO to a wartime CEO. I don't think that's necessarily required at this stage, at least for us as a company, but it's really important that leadership weighs in on the ongoing situation in the weekly all hands, and that you're continuing to keep the team, that you're continuing to ask questions from them to ensure that they're being well informed, but then also that you're also hearing their problems. So let's talk about productivity. So now that we've covered the empathy and just a couple of tips as to how to continue to navigate in this era, let's now start talking about productivity. So one of the things we do as a company is that we have our quarterly OKRs, objectives and key results. But one of the most effective things at the company has been monthly milestones. So the way we structure things, and because we had this pre-COVID, it made things so much easier when we transitioned into remote. So the way we work, and of course our software helps with this as well, is that we have our quarterly OKRs set at the leadership level. Then we have our monthly milestones, and we do them by two areas. One is product and one is growth. And I'm actually going to share with you our March monthly milestones presentation. But basically what this does is, if you already have these set cadences in place in advance, then once you go remote, it's a lot easier to just follow these cadences, because everyone already understands where the product is going from a monthly perspective. So from a product perspective, we do public release milestones. So we typically do anywhere between 4 to 6 public release milestones. And so every month we make a commitment that in March, these are our 6 monthly milestones that are public releases that we're going to do. And majority, and just to give you a bit of more of an idea of our team, we're about 80% in engineering. And one of the things we wanted to do with these monthly milestones was ensure that everybody is on the same page as to what we hope to achieve, specifically in that month. Starting to receive a few questions, Q&A here, and I'll just take a look. Okay. Great. I think, Lauren, do I have access to Q&A on Zoom or just a chat?
The only question I see here on the Q&A is, will the slides be available after the presentation? So that's what I'm seeing on my end. If you just click on Q&A.
Great, thanks. Yes, they will be available. Now, let's talk about how you break down these monthly milestones into weekly sprints. Before I do that, let me just also quickly share our monthly milestones presentation that I have open right here. So just as a quick template, the way we do our monthly milestones, looks like my screen sharing is paused, so I'm just going to hit share again. Keynote, and there we go. So one of the ways we do our monthly milestones is that at the beginning of the month, during the all hands itself, so we do weekly all hands, and during the all hands itself, we share our monthly public release milestones. So very quickly, these are some of our PR public release milestones. So one of the things we do is we do a retro on last month, and then we do a percentage. Okay, what percentage of milestones did we achieve? So we were at roughly about 73% for our Feb completion milestones. And then the other thing we do is for the next month, we then list out what public release milestones do we commit to. And yes, there are going to be on an ongoing basis customer commitments, just things that come up in terms of feature requests. But one of the things we really do is all of that is essentially starts to get prioritized in our backlog. And Derek, if you'd like to add on a little bit as to how we manage the month's milestones as well as the ongoing backlog, and then a little bit on prioritization as well as new things come up during the month.
Sure. I think the way we do prioritization is pretty similar to how generally PMs do prioritization in any organization. So I think any PM that's in the audience would be familiar. But essentially, obviously, our main goal is to continue to drive towards the roadmap that we've defined, and those are set at the objectives level that then are broken down into specific initiatives and features that we are rolling out to achieve those goals. But what we do is we are mindful of the fact that the importance of addressing customer requests. And so what we do is we really keep our generally our goals at a level that is that has some level of flexibility, so that we know that we're not defining specific features for, but rather than achieving some business or customer goals. And in that way, we also, when we do the planning, we give ourselves room to harden products, to kind of go back to reducing tech debt, going back to, or giving ourselves room to address needs that come up that we haven't really thought about, or something that comes from rolling out new features that we realize it requires some additional work to address. So that's kind of high level how we do the prioritization. I think, like I said, if you've been a PM at a software company, it's not unlike generally how the best practices for PMs to do their prioritization.
All right. So then from the monthly milestones, we then start to break off into weekly sprints. So a sprint is a time-boxed event, and typically what I've seen is when I talk to most teams about the words and the term sprint, they assume that it's only a once in a blue moon type of event where you're really trying to ship something by a certain point of time, and so you're sprinting towards that goal. In agile terminology and in an agile development process, it's entirely different. So the way sprints essentially work is that you're either doing them weekly or bi-weekly or monthly. And so it depends on the team and your existing use case. But basically within a sprint, what you're doing is you're making a commitment to meet a certain amount of tasks or a certain amount of tickets. And specifically, you're trying to enable the engineering team to have this time-boxed event. And typically sprints are recurring as well. I think that we just received a question. Lauren?
Yeah, so I have one question from Jeff. Do product ideas get prioritized before the monthly meeting? If so, is this a consensus or one person's opinion?
Sure, thank you. Anything else for the second question, or just that one?
And then we also have a hand raised from Matt Carlucci, which we can go to If you'd like to start there.
Yeah, so Jeffrey, firstly, to answer your question, one of the things to keep in mind is that product ideas are going to be thrown at you from multiple different angles and multiple different people, your customers, your users, your investors, your stakeholders, your employees, and your team. And so one of the things to keep in mind is to develop a prioritization matrix where you're thinking about engineering effort, where you're thinking about value to customer, and you're really trying to prioritize, in our instance, we really try to prioritize features that are low engineering effort and high value to customer. We also continue to talk to our users and customers. So one of the things we practice at the company is that it's not what the leadership says, and it's not what the CEO says in terms of what needs to get done on the product side. It's all customer and user led. So we consistently conduct surveys to continue to monitor and measure product market fit. We use simple questions like, how disappointed would you be if Tara was turned off tomorrow? The other thing we continue to do in this prioritization exercise is we're always constantly challenging ourselves. For us, one of the things we practice is we're design first. And so for our platform, we want to make sure how easily can things get done from a productivity standpoint for our teams in how few clicks. And so we're always thinking about how to reduce the number of clicks for a certain exercise. And so prioritization is, for us, we keep it very simple. We really base it off of eng effort and value to customer. However, I've heard from product leaders across the board that it can become a very difficult exercise once you grow beyond a certain point. And I'm sure, Derek, you've experienced that when you've been at larger orgs as well. But one of the things to keep in mind is you should develop your own prioritization matrix. There are several out there already that you can find from agile workbooks as well as product management terminology workbooks. But one of the things to keep in mind is when you're small, you need to be nimble. And so you can't spend time in significant meetings discussing the value of a certain feature. Keep discussions to a minimal. And in fact, being remote is going to help with that significantly anyway. So one of the things for us, it has been easier because we do have consensus on the leadership level in terms of what we want to see from the platform. So we have been lucky in that regard. However, I have heard from product leaders where the prioritization exercise can be a difficult chore. Great. Okay, we'll move on. So the other thing also from a productivity standpoint is to think about daily priorities and focus state. How can you ensure that every individual on the team has an understanding of what they need to do on a day-to-day basis? And so one of the things we do is we host stand-ups and fairly efficient stand-ups, if I must say, because they're typically about 15 minutes. So Derek, do you just want to touch upon very quickly our daily stand-up routine and then, how we usually do a round robin with our engineers?
Yeah, absolutely. So we practice pretty standard Scrum Agile. So what that means is we follow, a daily. The daily stand-up is a process that we go through, where engineers are coming together to and individually talking about what they have accomplished the day before, what they are planning to do the day after, or the current day, and also to discuss any blockers that are blocking them from progressing. One of the things that is also interesting in our situation and may be relevant for some of you is that we do, like Eva said, we do have a base in Poland as well. So the way we conduct our stand-up with them is that we leverage tools like Slack, using daily stand-up information that they enter onto Slack in a specific channel. And in their case, what they're the questions that they are answering in the Slack channel would be around what they have accomplished that day and what their plans are for the next day. And that's because of the time zone differences, so that it enables us to have a good handoff. So in Poland, when they provide their stand-up information, it's usually towards the end of the day, their time, which is early morning for us. So when our team in California read their stand-up notes, we get a sense of where they are kind of right at that moment in time. And the other thing we do is we also continually share California's updates with them as well. So that next day when they start work again, they will know where progress is with our team in California. And that's one of the things that is going to be critical as we remote, and as we are thinking about how to manage teams from across time zones, really thinking through at what point when they read the information, like what's their mindset, what's the time zone, and how do you hand off information?
Thank you, Derek. Now, the other thing also is that we facilitate all of these processes with our own software. And obviously that's been a significant advantage for us. But one of the things with Tara is that we built it in mind to keep it zero configuration. And that's been a godsend and a blessing for a startup like us that needs to move very quickly. And so we wanted to make sure that we're not spending time configuring the software and having to create those configurations so that we can start using it. And so we built that and kept that in mind. So one of the things with Tara and the software overall is that you essentially start off by building requirements. So we consistently receive these questions from product leaders as to how long should requirements and specs be? And how do you organize the typical agile spec? We recommend to keep it as short as possible. Specs of 10 pages or so, even above 2 pages, I can guarantee you your engineers are not going to read them. In fact, I've heard this over and over again from engineers that they don't read specs. And so one of the things we wanted to do with our software was enable the reading of specs by firstly, just having a simple editor where you can just add the spec, but then in the same view, you also have your tasks to start to be added. So for me as a leader, what I typically do is, can everyone see my screen? Great. So good, can you see my screen? Just double checking. Awesome, thank you. So here, you know, this is our instance of Tara on Tara, and so what we do here is we basically store the spec, so it's one place. You don't have to go into multiple Google Docs, and then we actually start to monitor all the tasks that are associated. So what typically happens in our process is that either the engineering manager, so David Keith is our eng manager, Derek Wong, our PM, or the individual engineers start to add tasks that correspond to the requirement or to the spec within one view. And so one of the things we've done then is when you go into the sprints view, you can actually monitor and see how the requirements are running and how many tasks remain in each specific requirement. So then you can start to see that, okay, for this specific requirement, let's say there's 2 tasks remaining, then maybe we should start either adding more tasks since that requirement isn't complete, or there needs to be some of those tasks added into a sprint because we want to complete that requirement. So, and you know, and this goes without saying for any type of project management software that you're using, documentation is going to become more important in this remote era because that's what your team is going to refer to versus you know, just tapping on your shoulder at the office, trying to get clarification on something. So one of the things we've done, and very lucky with this, pre-COVID, everything in terms of all the features that we're building, this is the actual instance of Tara, and these are all of our features. They're consistently documented in the software. And so whatever software you use or currently have, make sure that you have your requirements properly stored and that your requirements are kept short. The problem is most softwares don't have the spec and the tasks in one view. However, try to configure your views so that you have the spec and the tasks that way. Now moving into sprints. So this is our current ongoing sprint. Right now it is about 8:40 a.m. In San Jose. So what's going to happen at roughly about 9:30 is we're going to receive an update from Poland because their day has ended for their daily stand-up. And then at 10 a.m. we're going to receive an update from our engineers here for their daily stand-up. And so what typically ends up happening then is our CTO, Sayed, Derek, as well as David, our eng manager, read through those stand-ups. And then if there's any kind of reprioritization that's required, that happens in the software itself. So before a sprint, let me also talk a little bit about sprint kickoff, as well as how our typical sprint kickoff takes place. So once all of the tasks have been created and we have our requirements, we then start to build out sprints. So in Tara, what you can do is you can create ongoing sprints and repeat them at a certain point of time. So whatever Kanban board you're using, whether it's Trello or any of the other existing project management softwares, one of the problems is you can't really set it on repeat. But what you can do in Tara is that you can actually set the duration. So we recommend doing sprints, whether you do them on a monthly basis, and so you just want to store your monthly milestones. Interestingly enough, we've seen companies more likely do that in insurance tech, as well as digital agencies typically have monthly milestones. However, fast-moving startups, as well as larger corporate enterprise orgs, are mostly at 2 weeks. Most orgs tend to be at 2 weeks. We internally here do it at 1 week. And Derek, do you want to touch upon why we decided to do 1 week really quick as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like any smaller startups, what we want to do is really put a structure in place where we can be very agile. Going back to the early question around how to drive towards a roadmap and how that ties in with our daily and weekly activities. Essentially, we have a larger goal. We have a set of larger goals that we're moving towards, but we know that on an ongoing basis, we get requests as well as feedback from customers that we need to be reacting to, as well as putting in work to address them. So keeping ourselves in a 1 week cadence helps us to be very responsive to the needs of the environment and to the changes that we're observing in the field while we're driving towards the longer term goals.
Yeah. The other thing also is to think about effort. So one of the things we practice and we also recommend in the software to the teams that use the software is to continue to do effort estimation. So effort estimation is really interesting. And one of the things that actually ended up happening at our company as well, we started using Tara at engineering, and then other parts of the org, marketing/growth, wanted to use Tara as well, because we're like, hey, engineering is running sprints. Why can't we run sprints as well and have our weekly milestones too? So the way effort estimation works is each individual that is working on the task provides a predicted effort, which is, and typically we recommend to do this in days for each task, because then you can also have subtasks within the wider task, and you can consider it a user story. But once you add in your effort estimate, there's then, the way the platform works is then it then starts to predict your team's velocity overall. But just as a team, it's a good exercise to predict effort in terms of number of days that you expect the task to take. And then you can do predicted versus actual variance analysis that, okay, if I predicted this task would take 3 days, but because we're now remote, it's probably going to take 4 or 5, or even 2. Maybe your team has become more productive ever since you've gone remote. That is an important discussion to have. And so one of the things that happens in the software that we use internally is we have this ongoing type of Gantt chart that's based on the calendar view. And so every Monday we check in and we see, okay, during the stand up, what are items that are still in to-do state that need to be moved to doing state. And then we use this for our Monday stand-ups as well. But on an ongoing basis, the other thing that ends up happening also is within the calendar view, you can also start to see for each engineer what's typically taking place for their predicted and then also their actual variance. Having some connectivity issues. So I'm just gonna share my screen again. Just timing out here. So what typically ends up happening is you see the predicted effort on the left and then the actual effort. And that stirs up a conversation where it's like, hey, it looks like for individual engineers at least, we've seen that start to stir up a conversation where they're asking themselves, okay, it looks like for that specific task, I predicted it would take me 1 day, and let's say it did take 1 day, But in some cases, it might be that I predicted I would be completed in 2 days, and then it takes 3. And we've had instances where the engineers have seen this chart, and so on the left is predicted, and then on the right is the actual. And they've said, okay, maybe I need to go back and for the next task, improve my effort. And so this can also help improve effort estimation across the board. So now let's talk a little bit about sprints. Lauren, how are we doing on time?
We have 15 minutes left.
Okay, great, thank you. Please continue to send your questions as and when they come up. We're happy to incorporate them into the discussion as we talk about process. So talking a little bit more about how we're directly connecting to code. So the other thing to remember about product and engineering productivity in particular is that you can create all the tasks you want, but the actual data of what's happening from a velocity standpoint resides specifically in Git. And so source control is whether you're using GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, that's really where the data resides in terms of commits and pull requests. And we've consistently seen that product leaders typically don't log in to GitHub to check on a day-to-day basis. So one of the things we did with our software, and what I recommend as well is whatever project management software you're using, make sure that there's a tight integration to Git. So on the sprint details page, what we do every morning, and what I like to do as well, just as a personal exercise, is in the morning, I can check what were the commits made by Team Poland. So here I can see Alex, we call him Code Jesus, might be a little blasphemous, but I can check what's going on with Team Poland in the morning of Pacific time. I can see yesterday what were some of the commits made by Bartek, Alex, and our 6 team members in Poland. And then as the day goes on in California, so it looks like David made a very early commit today, and so from there on, we're going to be able to see all the engineers and their productivity for the day. Also, this is time boxed. So the way it works is based on your sprint calendar and timeline that you set. Tara actually shows the commits and open pull requests for that timeline. So now let's talk a little bit about pull request. So an open pull request is typically, you can consider that as something that's blocking your velocity and your weekly productivity in terms of for that specific, for a specific feature or for a part of the product that needs to get shipped. And so if a PR has been open for a while and has gone stale, it means someone from the engineering team needs to either approve the PR or close it and continue to move forward. So one of the things we did was you can actually sort by oldest, newest on open PRs. And what we're actually doing now is we internally are creating an engineering guide that details specifically how long PRs should be and can be open for. And Derek, what has been your experience just in terms of how we've been handling PRs and how it's changed as the whole company has gone remote?
Yeah, absolutely. I can touch on 2 points. One is among engineers themselves. Oftentimes, even if you are very good at planning your sprint, when engineers kind of estimate the effort, they really think about how much time it takes to build the product. They oftentimes kind of don't take into consideration actually how much time to review the code and how much dependency there is. So oftentimes we see projects slipping or the sprint slipping because while there wasn't enough time to build the product or write the initial code, but the code review process gets stuck because the engineers that need to review the code, they are blocked by something else. And that's when PRs get open and they get stale for a couple of days and nothing gets progressed to the next stage. So this is where our PR process at being able to service it up, what is open, really helps the team to see, okay, what needs to be taken care of. So that's one piece. And then the other one piece is also for the larger audience, for myself as a product manager, for EBA, for others. Being able to see what actually gets closed, what's still outstanding, providing that level of clarity in a single view is super helpful. And that way, nobody needs to kind of ask the telephone question of, is this feature merged yet? Is this done yet, right? So that's where kind of two-prong, being able to help engineers to be more productive and minimize stale PR times, as well as providing clarity to the business owners, are kind of what really helps the team to be progressing as a whole.
Yeah, and one of the things that actually is going to be released today internally is Sayed, David, and our overall product and engineering leaders got together and started creating a remote engineering guide. So we have a general remote guide that's been shared across the team, but then we now also have a remote engineering guide that details some of the things just in terms of how to be functional and productive while being remote. We are also considering open sourcing this guide and sharing it publicly. It's just going through a few edits, but some things to keep in mind is you want to be descriptive with titles. All code that's touched should have comments in the PR. And then you should also have test coverage in your code. So heading back into the platform and the application. So one of the things to also note is that once the platform starts to develop an ability to understand your overall team's effort, the other thing that happens is that it then has an idea of recommended effort based on your team's past performance. So this is kind of a sprint load indicator. It gives product and engineering leaders an idea that your sprint might have been overloaded. And so you should consider rebalancing tasks, removing tasks from the current sprint to the next sprint, because most likely they're not going to get done. And you know, we're also thinking about ways on how to improve the overall sprint loading indicator, just in terms of how can we continue to deliver insights that are productive for product and engineering leaders, and you know, just as a part of the platform, as they continue to use it and as they continue to have continue to see productivity. So now I think we only have about 8 minutes remaining. So before we end, firstly, welcome your questions. Please feel free to share them in the Q&A. Before we end, I actually just wanted to make a very quick announcement. So as part of COVID, one of the things we've decided to do actively as a company is provide the software platform for free. And we are testing this currently. So what I wanted to mention was that every participant that has attended the webinar will receive at least 6 months of free access to the Tara AI platform. And so if you are interested in availing of this offer, just shoot us a note. You can shoot me a note at iba@tara.ai and we can activate that offer for you. So as a platform, we're currently in early access. And so you have to request an invite to get access to the platform. But if you are interested, we'll move you up the waitlist chain and we'll also provide you free access for at least a period of 6 months. And this is just something we'd love to do for the teams that have attended. And we are also considering making that public over time. So for now, this offer is limited to 43 North portfolio companies, as well as folks that have attended this webinar. Any questions, any other questions, concerns, comments that folks have? So another one of the questions that I've at least consistently received is, how can we continue to manage the existing team's just overall mental health and capacity and performance? So just because we're having to isolate and be socially distant from one another, it doesn't mean that we need to isolate in spirit. And so one of the things that's really important to note here is that you want to make sure that as a team, you're consistently holding lunch hours. So we have that in our calendar where every single day we open up Zoom for a lunch hour, and whoever can join joins, but we eat lunch together on Zoom. The other thing we do is we do something called Fur Baby 15. So it's 15 to 20 minutes of us just kind of sharing time with our pets on Zoom. And you know, that just enables us to kind of really de-stress for a bit. So these are some of the things to keep in mind, that even though we're having to isolate in a certain fashion, it's always important to know that we're not truly isolated. We are still a team, we are still together, we're in this, and there are ways to keep things going. One of the other things we did was workout Wednesdays. where we're going to be sharing a workout video on Zoom, and then all of us kind of get together and we work out sometime in the late afternoon or evening. So that includes ideas around yoga, Zumba, and even just, regular HIIT workouts and high intensity workouts as well. So keep that in mind also. I think we just received a question, Lauren, before we end. I think we have time for one final question.
Yeah, someone just asked, can you describe how a 43 North portfolio company can try your product?
Sure. So very simple. All you need to do is just head over to tara.ai. And so on tara.ai, I'll just quickly, once you're on tara.ai, just request early access. And then you're going to be filling out a type form that basically just talks a little bit about your software development process. Or you can also just email me, and we'll basically get you guys access as a team. So all we need to know is the number of people on your team and how many access usernames you'd like. And so the way we're working today is every week. Actually, the team has been working over time. We've had an influx of demand from teams that are looking to be productive remote on the software. And so by next week, we should be shipping the next batch of invites. So if you are interested, we'd be happy to give you guys free access. So it's www.tara.ai. Great. Another note, we are saving this presentation as a PDF, and we'll be sending it to everybody that has attended. The presentation does contain some information, additional information, in fact, to even what we were able to cover in our time together today.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for the generous offer. We'll make sure to get that information out about how to sign up with Tara. I did get one other question coming through that we probably have just a minute to go through. I'm kind of curious about the workflow to create and deliver new product requirements. What if the developer and PM have different opinions about new features?
I'll let Derek take that.
Sure. So I think the question is pretty high level. So happy to kind of discuss this further if need be, but I'll address it in a kind of generic way. So yeah, oftentimes developers and PMs have differing opinions about what that feature should be, and maybe even some of the implementation details. I think the key thing is really overall collaboration and having a single place to document the decisions, because ultimately this is a live discussion that you have to have between PMs and other stakeholders as well, and the engineering team on what needs to be built for what reason, and having those documented. And for us, we document it in the requirement itself. We spell out what are the core goals that we want to achieve for each of the features, why we're doing it, why now, and then leverage the requirement section to flesh out the details, including could be some level of technical specification, user flows, and obviously linkages to other documents if need be. So that's how we manage it. In the not too distant future, we'll be actually adding additional steps to the requirement feature itself to enable more like systematic capture of these decisions, and that's further to come.
Lauren, I think we just received one or two more questions. I should have time to address them if.
Not seeing them come through.
Okay. Yeah, I think it might have been an accidental hand raise.
Okay.
Great. Well, firstly, thank you so much, everyone, for attending this webinar. I hope this was helpful. I hope the tips addressed will enable your teams to feel more comfortable, will enable them to feel more productive, and to continue navigating in this remote era. One of the first things is all of this webinar has been recorded. And Lauren, hopefully we can send a recording over to everyone as well, so that you can share it with your colleagues and with your team members that you believe could be helped by the webinar. So thank you so much for attending. We had a great time, and we really appreciated the questions as well. They were very insightful. And of course, if there's anything else, any other questions, I'm on Twitter at Ibamasood, IBAMASOOD. And then, of course, my email also is ibaiba@tara.ai.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thanks to the team at Tara, Iba, and Derek for your time and for your generous offer for our companies. I will get this presentation out. So Iba and I will be sharing the emails here and get all of this out to you guys. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.